Hello, and welcome to episode 3, What Are You Worth? I'm your host, God's Gift to Libertarian Women, Dan Hill, and this is a Gold Kulak podcast. So, sorry this is a touch late. I'm releasing this Tuesday evening-ish, and I really want these to come out Tuesday morning, if not late Monday night. Just because I feel like there's really a gap in libertarian podcasts or liberty podcasts that really hit that Tuesday, Thursday time period. Everybody's podcast comes out on Friday, it seems like. Then you have some guys that do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then there's guys that do daily podcasts. So I would really like to be able to do Tuesday and maybe in the future Tuesday, Thursday, just to kind of fill that gap. But anyways, the reason why this is coming out late is I really wanted to do healthcare, but the more and more I dove into healthcare, the more I realized that I'm not ready to do that this week because it is very encompassing and it's going to probably be a two-parter. So it'll be in the future, probably not next week, but it's a reason to stay subscribed. We will go over some libertarian healthcare stuff, just not anytime soon. I'm still putting together my dossier. So instead, I would like to spend today talking to you about minimum wage. It's something that's been a lot in current events lately. That's popping up. You have different cities raising their minimum wage. You have St. Louis that actually dropped their minimum wage. So I thought it would make sense to bring it up. And the first thing, and I think the reason why minimum wage is that debate is because it makes sense to most of us. We don't want to go back to the 1870s when people were getting paid 10 cents, 15 cents, 25 cents an hour, right? It just seems horrible. One thing to keep in mind, Teddy Roosevelt went to Harvard, and he lived high on the hog, I guess, for $1,800 a year, okay? A year. He went to Harvard for $1,800 a year. The average cost for Harvard, what most people spent, was between $900 and $1,300 a year, which is about equivalent to like $15,000 today. I don't know off the top of my head, but it'd be right around in there. So, one, that's been the effect of the government on education, and two, when you're looking at historical hourly wages, they're shocking because of inflation, not because of what they're actually worth. But anyways, minimum wage makes sense, I think, to a lot of people. They don't want people to get underpaid. But the reason why it's an emotional response, right? They're trying to reduce poverty, but it's based entirely emotionally. Because people either A, remember back when they were a kid and made minimum wage and they struggled to get through that period of their life, or B, you're currently making minimum wage and you're that young generation that basically the politicians are trying to hook in and get on their party side for your next 60, 70, 80 years of life. Or less if we do universal health care. But we're not getting into it. I'm sorry. I really am. So the problem is it's entirely emotional is the reason why we do minimum wage. There's little evidence that actually suggests that it helps reduce poverty, right? And it depends on the region, and economics is extraordinarily complex. I like to always tell people it's really, really easy to screw up an economy and impossible to correct it. It takes people having trust in their money, their banks, their life situation, and there's all these different actors. It's impossible to really tell what's going on. However, there are some generalities we can get, and that is, by and large, minimum wage does not really have an effect on poverty, and we'll get into why in a second. However, there is one thing that is, by and large, a true statement by empirical data, and that is some workers do lose jobs. Now, sometimes it's not going to be the ones that you were trying to help. Sometimes it is. Sometimes in certain cities, if it's already an affluent city, you don't lose as many jobs, but by and large, you're going to lose some jobs. And the reason being, if I'm paying somebody $13, $14 an hour, well, that wouldn't be minimum wage, I guess. If I'm paying you $7.25 an hour, and you're just providing me some menial help, it's essentially a luxury position for the boss, right? I can afford to pay this person $7.25 an hour to help me sweep floors. But if you're going to make me pay him $10, $15, $20 an hour, I really don't need that. I already got employees that can sweep it. It was just luxury. So if your job or you are not worth a higher wage, bye-bye. Right? So if you're not worth that higher wage, you're not going to stay on. Secondly, we're also assuming too that, I guess one thing to keep in mind, not assuming, but one thing to keep in mind is that we're forgetting the fact that if people are capable or have better jobs available, they go for them. Maybe these are people that have maxed out their abilities. They are just a minimum wage worker. They are not worth more to the workforce. And that's that supply and demand thing, because it's one thing important, I think, to keep in mind, and it's kind of trippy to think about, but even if you are not an entrepreneur, you don't own a business, you're not involved in that, you're still a producer. And not only with what you're producing for your job, but you're also a producer in that you are producing your hours, right? You have a commodity you can give to someone, and that is your labor. So the value of your skills, your education, so on and so forth, that's what's going into what your labor is valued at. So if you're not valued at that new minimum wage, you're probably going to lose your job. And I will say this, that generally speaking, the people that lose their jobs, it's generally very small. It's a smaller percentage. It's not like some huge firing or layoff, I guess. It tends to be a smaller effect, but it's still there, right? So the economists, whether you're Austrian or Chicago or whatever, the effect's still there. But who's most... The layoffs, essentially. So who's most impacted by minimum wage? Well, first off, there's about 58% of the workforce that is paid hourly, and which equates into 79.9 million people are paid hourly. Of those that are paid hourly, only 2.7 are paid minimum wage or less. And that's actually down from 2015. In 2015, 3.3 were paid federal minimum wage or less. I'm sure part of that is some of the cities that are raising their minimum wage. But here's the thing. Of those 79.9 million people that are paid hourly, 2.7 are making minimum wage or less. That equates to 1.6 million people, which is the population of Idaho, which sounds kind of large just because Idaho's a state. Idaho has a smaller population than most cities, so look up your city population and compare. And while 1.6 million people is a lot, considering the fact that 7.9 million people make an hourly wage, it's not really all that much. And especially when you dive into the fact that 1/5 or 20% of hourly employees are under the age of 25. So it's essentially their first jobs, or the jobs they're using to get through college or high school, their summer jobs, whatever. 20% of those are young workers. Yet they make up nearly half of the minimum wage employment opportunities. So half of the people making minimum wage are 25 or less, working on their first jobs, probably part-time, trying to get through. Well, probably part-time is an assumption. I take that back. But they're trying to get through something, right? That is not their career. But okay, so what about the other 50%? So only 2% of hourly employees are employed full-time and making minimum wage and are above the age of 25. So these are those 2% that we hear about, all of their hardships. So we're only hearing about the hardships of a very, very small fraction of American workers. And I get it. And this is why it's emotional, and this is why libertarians are branded as these heartless, cruel capitalists that are okay with a certain segment of the population being poor and yada, 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 and so on and so forth. But no, that's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is the hypocrisy here and the fact that we're trying to raise minimum wage to help these impoverished people, of which you're not really directly affecting them. Minimum wage is to keep your college barista happy. It's not to actually help the people in Detroit struggling to make a living. It's to help your high school summer job, your job sweeping the mechanic shop floor. It's not to help the single mother of 3 that's working full time. And the hypocrisy I'm going to say is because there's something that actually has proven to more directly target and more positively affect the impoverished that are working minimum wage or are making above minimum wage and are still impoverished. And that is the Earned Income Tax Credit. Now, for those of you that don't know what it is, I'll explain it in a second. And please hold your breath, those that do. I'm not going to say I fully support this, but essentially what it is it's a tax credit for people making below a certain amount of income with so many dependents. So I had employees on my farm last summer, and I have these charts right next to me, actually, in a drawer that are pay schedules for tax withholding. So if you make between like $1,500 and $1,550 a month, then I would withhold this much. If you were single with no dependents, this much with 1 dependent, this much with 3, and it runs all the way out to like 10 or 12. It's kind of crazy. So that's that chart. And essentially, and that's for pay withholding, right? Both I have them for federal and state and so on and so forth. They would have that for the EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit. And if you were making so much and had so many dependents, you get a tax credit for this much, which I think we as libertarians first go, oh, so you're telling me it helps poor people not to have to pay taxes. Shocker. So that part's good. However, there is one part that we as libertarians would be totally against, and that is the fact that, let's say you qualified for $1,000 in tax credits, but you're only taxed $700. They'd pay you the difference, so you would still get a $1,000 tax return. So that part is not libertarian. That's getting closer to the universal minimum income, which is not a good idea for several reasons. First off, it's just redistribution of wealth and all those normal anti-socialism talking points. But that's the point I'm trying to make. There is a liberal program that actually statistically has proven to help impoverished people better, because not only does it target the working poor because they have to have a job and they have to be poor, but it also increases employment because you're telling me I can get extra money if I have a job, blah, blah, blah. Total socialism type stuff. It just makes so much sense why this is an emotional topic, why they are basically being irrational that minimum wage needs to be somewhere, because there's better liberal programs to begin with there's better libertarian alternatives, like why don't we get rid of this regulation, and that regulation, and get rid of minimum wage, and you'll find out that the economy just starts humming so much better. And I think that's where I'm going to leave you today. And I hope that isn't too radical. I'm not endorsing the EITC. I like the idea of poor people not paying taxes because, and I think that's something we're going to have to come to as libertarians. We're not going to become anarcho-capitalists, if that's what you believe in a day. It's got to be slow, kind of like how we've slowly slipped into this socialism slide to where Bernie Sanders is a legitimate presidential candidate. We kind of got to go the opposite way and educate our friends and family and get to a point where we're slowly pulling back the welfare state and the regulations. We can't just do it overnight. Ron Paul can't get elected in 2020 and suddenly we're living in a libertarian utopia a month later. So that's the point I'm trying to make, is first off, and I guess I'm reiterating here again, and I apologize for that, but the minimum wage, raising it is just an emotional response to try and help people, and that's admirable, but that's not the best way to help people. That you have better liberal ways of doing it. And B, just reducing people's taxes overall has proven to be more effective in helping people. And before I go, that's just what I'm saying. And part of the reason why they say, the article I was reading on IZA.org, their World of Labor Evidence-Based Policymaking, they were saying that this extra money is going towards buying groceries and they're spending it in the economy and so on and so forth, which is only going to heat up the economy. So what happens if not only the impoverished are getting a tax credit, but the middle class? I mean, the middle class is paying 20, 30%, somewhere between 18 and 30% in taxes. What happens when those thousands and thousands of dollars start going back in the economy? I guarantee you that a lot of your 2% of people employed with minimum wage are suddenly going to find other places where they can be of value, because now we need more of these other places when people actually have disposable income. Because when they don't have disposable income because it's going towards ineffective policies, or people are losing jobs because the employers have to start cutting into their profits, which means they need to reduce inputs and so on and so forth. If we can get to a point where people are free to spend their money the way they see fit, I think it's just better for all of us. Basic Milton Friedman stuff. And I apologize if I got a bit rambly at the end. I went a little off script here, but I just thought there was a couple points that needed to be made. So anyways, thank you so much, so much for listening to these early episodes. So I'm trying to figure stuff out. I'm trying to get quality information to you. All the sources I used were great. Once again, please subscribe to the podcast. If you want to leave a comment, so far all I got still that Podbean website. Just search for Gold Kulak on Podbean. I'm on iTunes. I'm on Google Play. I'm going to be on Stitcher and some couple other things soon. So thank you so much for listening. Please keep listening and have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you next Tuesday.